And welcome back to Moving Conversations. I'm Brian Ritchie. Joining me as always is Nora St. John. Morning, Nora. How are you doing?
I'm delightful, Brian. We had our very first rain for California, which is really quite a, it's always a major day. Like the first, because it's been months and months and months since it's really rained. Everything's
Really?
been soaking. Oh yeah, this is California. It doesn't rain for 6 months out of the year.
Wow.
It's the nature of Mediterranean climate. Not like where you are, I know.
Oh, I was going to say that's totally opposite to here, man. Oh, we went through a couple of weeks that we were soggy for a little while. So yeah, it's been dry the last week. It's been actually beautiful. Leaves have not
Nice.
turned yet, but it's been making that adjustment, that that change is,
Feels
you can
like
feel it in the
fall.
air. Yeah.
Yeah.
They're saying we're
Yeah.
going to
The
have one
light's
more
a little
heat.
different.
Yeah, the heat wave's going to come and then it's going to go and then it should stay down. So it should be nice weather for a few weeks. So
Nice.
hopefully, crossing our fingers, let's hope.
That's all we can do, right? We have no
Exactly.
control over many things, and that's one of them.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, before we get on to today's topic, because we're gonna be talking about what we talked about with two of our guests the last 2 weeks. So we're gonna go over some things on creating vision, cueing, imagery, etc. But before we do that, do us a favor, hit that like and subscribe button. It helps us out a lot. Share, comment. We really appreciate it. The majority of people who listen to this podcast download it regularly, do not subscribe. So you know what? If you do subscribe, it's automatically downloaded. It helps us out a lot. We really appreciate it. So do us a favor and do that. You can always check us out also on Instagram at Moving Combos, as well as Moving Combos at gmail.com is the best way to get in touch with us directly. We check that all the time and we always answer our emails. So with that being said, let's jump in and talk about who did we talk to the last 2 weeks?
We talked to two of my favorite teachers and people that I've worked with a lot. Tom McCook, a Pilates teacher from California, and Eric Franklin, who is the founder and the creator of the Franklin method, where he really combines imagery and movement and in some really detailed and rich and wonderful ways. So it was fun talking to both of them.
Oh, it was amazing. And I think I told you, and I mentioned it a little in the podcast, Eric Franklin, especially when I just saw his book and the images that he used to create things that I was explaining to people, but sometimes words just don't do it justice until they're said in a certain way. And when you see his images in the book, it was sort of, oh my gosh, absolutely. And then once you see the image, you can't not say that to a client and then they get it.
Right.
It just
So
sort of makes sense.
yeah, so for those of you who don't know, Eric has a bunch of books out, Eric Franklin. One of them is Dynamic Alignment Through Imagery,
And that's the
which
one
is
I
one
was
of
referring
kind of
to.
his major one, or kind of one of
Yep.
his bigger ones, a lot of littler ones, but that's like a pretty major one. And it's one of those wonderful moments of, like Brian said, you have a concept in your head, like, how the ankle works, for example, or something. And then he just has these beautiful drawings. He's a wonderful artist. And you just see, oh, he's got little arrows going, and you get that sense of movement and flow in his imagery that just explains things. Again, a picture speaks 1,000 words. And that's really what his images do. They give you a much clearer view of what's happening very quickly and simply.
The one that I remember distinctly was I was trying to explain how the foot works.
Yeah.
And two images that he had was one were logs, like on a log roll, how they were moving sort of independently, and each one was turning a little bit as the arch begins to raise up and flatten out, how they're actually rotating. And I never thought about it until I saw that. And then he had, for the rest of the foot, he had sort of this image of a raft and how the front of the raft can move one way as the back of the raft is moving the opposite way. And it just, as soon as I saw the pictures, I said, oh my gosh, that's exactly what's going on here. And while I knew that looking at the foot, to be able to explain that to someone so clearly, because everybody knows what a raft looks like. Everyone knows what logs look like going down a river, especially, it's like you have 4 logs next to each other and they're all rolling independently. It's like, oh, I get that. And I've used those images countless times and people just say, oh, well, that makes sense. It's like, oh, yeah. So yeah, that's one of the few times that I just read something that was so clear, crisp, and I thought his imagery was phenomenal. And I've always loved it.
One of the things, yeah, this is that's really his magic. I think a lot of his magic. Again, I've studied a couple of the long week-long trainings with him, and the major thing I got out of it, there was a lot of things. Like I knew a lot of the material because I've studied the bones and things like that. But what I got out of it was how to teach it, how to explain it, how to be creative with helping somebody understand a complex concept, right? It's like it wasn't that the information was always super unique, but it was that his ability to communicate it was so much better than mine had been. And that was really like just fantastic. I love that.
Yeah. And both of them have a unique energy to them because I've, hung out with both of them, socially at conferences and things like that, as well as been in their classes and they've been in mine. And it's always interesting to be around them because they have a very gentle spirit. And you can tell that the way that they teach and the way that their energy comes across is so healing. That's sort of, wow, it's very unique. It's just a unique situation. So I've always appreciated the time that I've gotten to spend with them, as little as it's been. I think it's awesome.
Agreed. So what we want to bring to you guys, I think, is a little bit of just how do we apply this? What happens? What do we do? And just talking through what both those guys gave us in terms of feedback. Sorry about that. And how we're kind of going, what do you do with this? How do you make your imagery more alive? How do you help to communicate better to your clients? Like, how do we do that?
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that's incredibly important. It's important for us to get that whenever we have a client in front of us, and you and I have talked about this before, sometimes the hardest thing is to get them to do what you want them to do. And
yes.
And you're trying to find the most succinct way, the easiest way for them to understand. And you and I have said this many times. You'll say 12 different things and none of them hit home. So it's trying to find the one thing that works right for that one person. I think that's very important. And I think if it's what I learned from Eric and also Tom is sometimes it's if I have a clear vision in my head before I even open my mouth, that really does help. I mean, that's half the battle right there.
Yep. And I know you and I both taught a lot and taught to conferences and to teachers and that kind of thing. And one of the skills that I've certainly worked on a lot, as have you, is how do I communicate this? How do I say this? And having 17 different ways to say the same thing. Bring out the bones, you bring out some imagery, you talk about it this way. And I think if there's anything to say to you out there, whether you're a practitioner or you're a student or you're a physical fitness buff, is like get creative with how you think about things.
Yes.
Because the other thing too that I find, and I was just talking to some students last night about this, is if a student or an instructor has a very firm, I'm going to say rigid view of something, kind of like this is the way it is, and this is the only way I know to talk about it, that doesn't always work for every client in front of them. I think this is a little bit silly, but I have a friend who was traveling with another friend down in Costa Rica. And this friend of a friend didn't speak Spanish. And he's looking at a plate of something that's in the buffet. In the buffet line. He's looking at the plate. And he's like, he wanted to know if it was fish. And so he goes, is this fish? And the guy goes, papas, which means potatoes in Spanish. And then just goes, fish, louder. And the guy goes, papas, fish, papas, fish. Like this just kept escalating. Like the guy, there was not communication happening here, right? And rather than finding a different way of asking the question, right, he just kept going, fish, louder and louder. And I've been in a couple of situations like that with instructors where I'm watching them just kind of turn red in the face, saying the same thing, like put your right leg on the bar, put your right leg on the bar. But like, just stop, take a breath, find another way to say that, right? Yep. And it was just such a funny moment, like papa's fish, papa's fish. So, communication is about paying attention, about backing off of what isn't working sooner rather than later and trying another route in.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's funny. I remember my first time going to Korea I realized that I knew no Korean, but I know Japanese and I know Spanish, not a lot, but I know words in each. So I found myself speaking a hybrid of
Uh,
English, Japanese, Spanish,
Spanish.
a little Filipino from Hawaii, and I found myself doing this unconsciously, and they're looking at me, and it's like a dog watching, it's like the RCA Victor dog look, that they have this look to them, and I'm thinking, oh, that's not your language. Okay, yeah, that's not working. So I totally get it. I totally get what you're saying, because it was like, okay, yeah, turn off your brain. Okay, just understand there's a language barrier here. And when we have clients
Exactly.
in front of us, it can feel that way. It
Yeah.
can absolutely feel like there's a language barrier, because we're saying one thing. And like you said, if you say it over and over and over again, it's not going to get through. If it didn't get through the 5th time, it's not going to get through the 15th.
No,
Not
exactly.
from me. Someone else may say the same word. It might filter in. It might go through those little filters in their brain differently. That's possible. But
Yeah.
if I keep saying it, it's not. So you're right. We have to come up with a way to have multiple ways to say the same thing,
Mhm.
or to cue a different way. And I think
Yes.
finding different ways to cue is also very important.
Yes. So when you think about cueing, Brian, what are the different ways you use to cue? Like, what are the
Well,
different tools? Just to get kind of practical here for a minute. What are the
yeah,
ways that you think about that?
obviously verbal. Verbal's number one.
Yeah.
Uh, I always go back to, okay, how do we learn? Some people are auditory, some people are, kinesthetic, some people are going to be more visual. So if I'm going to teach something, oftentimes I will do one or two repetitions. As I joke with my staff, you only have to be able to do 1 or 2 repetitions properly. That's all we have to demonstrate. So, so we show it so that they have a little bit of an understanding of, oh, okay, because as you and I have discovered doing this podcast, we can describe something, but if someone is not auditory, it's going to be very challenging for them to get it through just words. So oftentimes
Absolutely.
demonstrating makes a huge difference. Then as they are about to do the exercise, I will verbally tell them what to do, where I want them to feel it, whatever I'm trying to get through to them. I'd say 80% of the people will get it that way. Then there's kinesthetic. I got to put my hands on them. I've got to
Mhm.
pull their shoulder blades back, touch what muscle I think they should be feeling, or
Yeah.
I don't want you focusing here. I want you focusing here, drawing their attention to where it needs to be, or the motion that I'm looking for, especially when it comes to things like the scapula. Say, okay, I want your scapula to feel like it's moving in this direction in an upward rotation. And at the top of the position, you're going to feel this top portion dip down a little bit, so that they get an understanding of, oh, okay. Now, do they understand it 100%? No, but at least it's the best way I find to guide them as close as I can to where I need them to be.
So I want to back up a minute. So we've talked about
Yep.
auditory, we've talked about visual, we've talked about kinesthetic, right? That was a really
Yep.
good introduction to like 3 things we do. I want to back up to auditory, and because this is something I've again thought about a lot, as we do, is oftentimes what we're trying to do is give them a feeling or an experience. Like, well, actually, let's talk about that different levels. On the one hand, and I always think of like first level of my auditory is, where are you putting your body parts?
Uh-huh. Mm-hmm.
Right? My right leg's going to go here, my left leg's going to go there. I'm going to reach my arm up, whatever it is, like simple physical direction, right? Is often like the first step. And
Yep.
and without that, like you can't go anywhere. Then once, like, let's say you're teaching client for the 4th, 5th, 100th time, you don't necessarily need to say, put your foot here, put your hand there, right? You don't need to say that anymore, because they know that. So then you start to layer that in. And I always think about how you layer in different cues, right?
Mm-hmm.
So once they've got the movement down, then you're thinking, oh, well, what focus on that right foot, or focus on putting the weight on your heel, or notice where the weight is on your sit bones, or whatever,
Mm-hmm.
whatever the sensation is you're trying to cue them into. And then I would say, and I think this gets back to some of what Tom's saying, is then what is their reaction to that? Because there's also
Mm-hmm.
like, you say something and you think you're giving them an experience, and then you ask them for feedback and you realize oh, that didn't make any, or they're going in a completely different direction than you had
Yeah.
intended, but you can't really tell because it's their brain that's doing it, and behind the curtain, you can't see what's happening in
Yeah.
there.
There's that processing that occurs.
Yeah,
And we all know people who are slow processors and others who are lightning fast.
yeah,
And I think when you're working with people who are, I'm going to say this, athletes, dancers, people who move for a living or who are good movers, their bodies
right.
just, they've always sort of been a natural at whatever they've asked their body to do. It seems that they understand very quickly. The
Yeah.
processing of what you're saying going to their brain works quickly. And then we have the other types who the
And I would say
processing
that
takes forever.
right, and I would say that's because it's practice. If you're an athlete, if
That's
you're
a
a
good
dancer, like
point.
you have had to translate auditory cues into movement
Yep,
for an extended period of time. And
absolutely.
clearly through feedback or performance or whatever, you've gotten better at it. But a
Yep,
lot of our clients have never had this experience. They've
they've
never
never
been
had to.
told no. So they're like, what?
Yep. Well, it's like you talk to some people and you say, "Oh, can you dance?" And they give
Right.
you they have this look on their face like, no, no,
The panic
the
appears
panic.
like,
Yeah,
no.
I don't dance. And I get that for both male and female. And it's because no one's
Yes.
ever asked them to move their body. Uh,
Right.
Honestly, with some people that come to us, we may be the first person to ask them to move their body specifically. That's not just
Yes.
walking or jogging across the street or getting up out of a chair. We're actually
Yeah.
asking them to do something with specific purpose and intention, and that may be completely different for them.
Yeah. Consciousness. Right. I
Yeah.
mean, I know we talked a lot with Tom about creating that awareness of what you're doing. And so much of what we're trying to do with cueing is that it's like help them
Mhm.
understand what they're doing and bring it. If you're talking about motor control being going from unconsciously incompetent to unconsciously competent, like you're trying to bring up conscious competence in this
Mhm.
phase is like, what am I doing? Is this better than this? Does this feel better than that? Is this more effective than that? Depending on what their performance goals are. Yeah.
Yeah. And I'm sure you have this too. There's a lot of clients who they've been so disconnected with their body for so long,
Yeah.
they're constantly
Yeah.
asking, "Is this right? Am
Yeah.
I doing it right? Is this okay? Is this right?" And it gets annoying after a while. It's like I keep saying, a happy train or a quiet trainer is a happy trainer because it's like I don't have anything to correct. You're doing it properly, but they want the feedback because they're used to hearing it, and they're so unaware of what their body's doing in space that they're like, "Am I doing this right? I think I really don't know." So to get
Well, they
them to that
depend
point where they feel it is tough.
yeah, because it depends on that external feedback. Like, when they're asking you that, it's because they can't feel inside what they're trying to do. So they're
Yes.
trying to have you give them feedback that then, kind of completes the loop. And so
Yeah.
often, I mean, I certainly know, like, that's not really very effective,
Mhm.
right? If they keep needing you, and I remember there's this one client I distinctly remember who, man, she needed my reassurance every single move, every single time. It was just
Yeah.
who she was, right? Like she would do something and she'd say, okay, well, is that a 7 or an 8? Like she would need a number, like I was the judge, no, the Russian judge for gymnastics in her Pilates class. Like, that was a 7 on every single thing that she did. I mean, it did get a little bit exhausting, I have to
It
say.
does.
And a lot of it's because, and I worked with her for a long time. And at a certain point, I said, I'm not telling you that. You got to tell yourself that. You give you your number.
Oh, nice.
Because
Nice.
I had to turn that. I mean, I had to turn that around. Like, you cannot. You can't be dependent on me. You actually need to own this yourself,
Yep.
because that's the only way that you're going to change and make what needs to have happen happen. You got to own it. I can't own this for you.
I've done something similar. I've never done that. I'm thinking about one client in particular, thinking I might try that because he continually, "Am I doing this right? Is this okay? Is this all right?" And how I usually will talk to him is I'll say, "How does it feel? What are you feeling?
Uh-huh.
You know what we're trying to accomplish here. So what are you feeling? Are you feeling it where my fingers are touching?" Because he's very, I need to
Right.
really, focus. I'm thinking of a move today.
Yeah.
We were doing a modified pull down where he was bringing his elbows slightly down and back with the cable machine. And I'm squeezing right at the rhomboids, lower trapezius area, trying to get him to think about that. I said, are you feeling it where I'm touching? Yes. I said, then you're doing it right. I wanted him to
Yeah.
trust himself that
Right.
yes, if I'm not making a lot of corrections, you're probably doing it okay. And to trust what you feel and how
Right.
you're feeling it.
And that's another way to directly tell him what you're trying to do. Whether that changes things or not, I would imagine
Mm.
we'll see. That may be a long
Yeah.
process. But that's the idea, right? It's like learn to trust yourself, learn to feel this yourself, because this is actually your responsibility to understand what's happening. Like I can guide you, and I can certainly, you're learning a new move, I'm going to help you through it. But if you're doing squats for the 900th time, you're doing footwork for the 900th time, you don't need me to tell you to bend your knees, right? I mean, presumably some do,
Let's hope.
but mostly not.
Yeah. I am thinking of a couple clients though that they are very disconnected, and
Yeah.
we do have to tell them each time how to squat properly.
Yes.
And I've worked with them for 5 years, and I'm thinking, am I that bad? Am I that bad of a trainer that you can't figure out how to squat properly 1 week to the next? But I also know that it's just a disconnect. They don't trust their body in space yet. Because once they do it
Yeah.
right once, they go, oh, I remember this. And their
And
body
then,
figures
then
it
they're
out.
good. But they got to
Then
get
they're
like,
good.
once they're on the track, they're fine. And once you've
Exactly.
assured them that they're on the track,
Right.
right? They have the confidence then to carry on. Yeah.
It's that momentum. Once they feel that they have it, like riding a bike, they've got the first few stride and then they're fine. But getting them to that first few can look a little ugly for a rep or two. And you're thinking, should it really be this challenging? But for some clients, it really is, because they don't have that kinesthetic awareness within themselves of where
Exactly.
they are in space.
And that takes repetition, and sometimes it doesn't happen really. Like I'm thinking of a couple of clients where I've done them for 16 years and they got better, but not that much better, right? So thinking about auditory too, so we've got like, how do you do it? And then what are you focusing on? The other
Mhm.
thing too that, and I certainly talked to Tom about this, Eric didn't bring it up too much, but the other thing is, why am I doing this? Creating
Yeah.
that purpose for them. And
Yep.
whether that's an anatomical purpose, like, well, I think if you like swing with a client the other day on her knees. So if you keep your weight a little more back on your heels, you'll put a little less stress on your knees when you bend over, something like that, right?
Mhm.
Oh, okay. So then they've got something to hang on to of why this is useful for them. Or certainly, you and I both work a lot with pain, and it's like, okay, well, let's see, does that feel better? Yes, that feels better. Okay, now we want to keep that posture or that concept of less pain moving forward and train that.
Mhm.
I think too is like, from where Eric is, sometimes that means explaining what's happening. So that gets
Mhm.
more into, what you just talked about with his way of talking about how the body works and helping your client really understand how the joints work or how something else works, which can often too help them to feel it more, understand it more, and be more effective in terms of what you're trying to get them to do.
Yeah. Yeah. Trying to get someone to make that connection can be challenging.
Yeah.
And like we said, having the variety of ways to do it uh, always does help. And Eric's way of explaining it does help for that. But you're right. Intention. What's the intention for this exercise? We've talked a lot about the why. There has to be a
Yeah.
why behind
Yes.
every exercise.
Yes.
I mean, every class I teach, I say it. I want to make sure that they realize that, because if you don't have a why, then you're wasting their time, their money, and your time, quite frankly, because
Mhm.
you're basically throwing a dart at a dartboard blindfolded and facing the wrong way. You're not going to necessarily hit the target unless you get very, very lucky. And if you don't have a target, then it's really a waste of time.
I was just, if you don't have a target, like that's the why, right? Is the target. If you don't have
Yep.
a target, then what are you doing? I mean, really.
Precise,
Yeah.
precisely.
Then why am I spending this time, money, and energy with this, this trainer or this Pilates teacher when I don't know why I'm there or what I'm doing or where I'm going or what it's going to do
Yeah.
for me? Yeah.
And
Yeah.
establishing the
Exactly.
intention in them is also important,
Yes.
because I can have a why. I
Yep.
can know that this exercise is for posture. You've got rounded shoulders, you got weakness to your posterior shoulder girdle. So we're going to be doing this exercise for that. And I've been notoriously called a a teacher when I'm working with clients, because I'm always teaching them anatomy, telling them what it is. But to me, if they don't know why we're doing an exercise, they're just going along for the ride. And there are a few people who are like, don't talk to me. I don't need to know that. Just tell me what to do.
Yeah.
But I want them to know. I want them to share that responsibility and that understanding of what we're trying to get out of this particular exercise. We're doing this for posture specifically. Can you feel these
Right.
muscles back here? They're pulling your shoulder blades back. We really want to get some tone there so that it's going to want to stay back. Even if it's just a fraction of an inch, it'll still pull you into better posture. When they understand that, they go, oh, I get it. And now they help own that
Yeah,
exercise. And
exactly.
they take part responsibility for it.
Yeah, and I would say there are clients, and I actually think of my mother in this in this circumstance, who don't really want to take responsibility for it. Now, she didn't start Pilates till she was in her mid-70s. So there was cognitive issues at that point and memory and all that stuff. And so she
Sure.
would just go in and be told what to do and have a marvelous time. Like she was not going to own a lot of what was happening just because she was at that point in her life when she just was happy to go in and have a workout from, Octavio, her lovely Pilates teacher.
Mhm.
And I was cracked up because I would go and watch her work out, and it was just like, okay, what's next, Octavio? And then he would like tell her, okay, da, 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 what's next? Like she didn't really own anything because she
Yeah.
was at that point in her life where that just wasn't going to happen, honestly. And then I think about what you just said. I thought was useful. And there's a story I like to tell. John Zohorik, who invented the anatomy in 3D kind of method or whatever, or was the original founder for me and the original inspiration for all the anatomy stuff that we do, all the building things like this guy over here. He told a really good story, which is he had really bad back pain. He was an artist, and they just said, oh, you have back pain, right? He didn't really know what that meant. And
Yeah.
so one of the things that he did to understand that was he built a spine. I don't remember what material. I think some of it was clay, but some of it wasn't clay. Like he built a spine and, nerves and put all the muscles on it. And from that process of building the anatomy, he understood what was going on in his back. And from that information, he was able to get out of pain by changing what he was doing. That's a rather
Interesting.
extreme circumstance, because he actually had a life-size skeleton and he put clay on it, and that was like hundreds of pounds of clay that kept
Oh
falling
my
off and landing on
gosh.
his floor in New York. Just imagine, right? Like you've got like that quadricep must have weighed 25 pounds.
I was
Anyway,
going to say, how does he do that?
well,
Wow.
a lot of clay fell off, and that's why the skeleton is not that big. But it was such a really, for me, it was not everybody's brain works that way, and not everybody's kind of neurobiology and stuff works that way. But in his
Yeah.
case, he built it. He really understood the structure, and that allowed him to kind of manipulate it in his mind and figure out how to make things work better.
Wow. That's interesting. That's really interesting. I didn't realize that he did it with a full-size skeleton, but it does make sense when you can actually visualize it and create it yourself so you see everything. Because you're absolutely right. If someone's told, you know, give you a great example. I was actually at the doctor yesterday talking about my shoulder. I've had tendonitis, tendinosis, and some other issues. And it's been plaguing me for about 6 or 8 months. And to be able to talk to the physician about specifically what's going on in there, let them understand that they could speak to me at a higher level and that I understood what they're talking about. Because at first they're doing these general, well, you have shoulder pain. I said, well, no kidding. What do you think I'm doing here?
Right, exactly. Duh.
But when I started getting into the specifics, it sort of dawned on me, people don't understand this. And you're just sort of, okay, I guess that's what it is. And they don't really understand and take ownership of what's going on. How can I make this better? What can I do
Yeah.
myself besides, what they tell me to? So that's interesting. That's really interesting. And I guess that's really what part of our job is to sort of bridge that.
When we can, and again, to your point, not
Yeah.
everybody's interested, but I think of more than one client where just understanding what they're trying to do like I've had a client who have structural limitations of whatever kind. Maybe they've got a scoliosis or something, right? And use that as an example. And a lot of times in their mind, they want to fix it. They want to be straight, for example. And everybody. So if you guys out there are thinking anybody is perfect, you're wrong. Everybody is asymmetrical. Everybody's got weird stuff happening. All of us are uneven. Like that's just the nature of it. So whether you've got scoliosis and something, serious and structural, or you're just, right leg stronger than your left leg, we're all uneven. So, but they have that image in their head, like, oh, I should be like this, or I should not be knock-kneed. I should straighten out my legs, for, two classic examples.
Yep.
And one of the things too is understanding you can't change the bones that much. I mean, you can't. You can certainly stabilize a scoliosis, and you can certainly compensate for knock knees and that kind of thing. But you're not necessarily going to change the joint structure, especially as an adult. So some of it is just also having people come to terms with who they are, what their limitations are, or what their structure is, and working within that. Because that's the other disconnect. Is like, well, I want to be that supermodel over there, or I want to be that super powerful soccer player over there. And I was like, well, you're not, right? So how are we going to get you to understand who you are, what your strengths and weaknesses are, and work from that? That's another little piece of that.
I've explained this to a lot of my male clients. I say, look, in our 20s and even 30s, we all think of ourselves as a Ferrari. We all think of ourselves as this high, sleek, body that can do everything and all of that. I say, on our best day, we're a Honda Accord. Most days, we're kind of like a Ford Pinto. We're hanging together. We're trying to get up the hill, but we're not working as well as we should. Our goal is to be the Honda or the Toyota Corolla. We just want to make it through every day, be healthy, happy, and keep working the way we ask it to work without things breaking down all the time. And when I explain that, people say, oh, well, that makes sense. It's like, yes, you're not a Ferrari.
That's such a perfect guy metaphor. I love that. Actually, I love that. It's perfect.
It totally makes sense.
I'm thinking of a female equivalent in my head. I'm not quite coming up with it, but
I've tried. Believe me, I've tried. I've been thinking, I've tried to, but the car one does work for a lot of women because, they understand that. It's like, look, all we want to do is to be able to continue to do what we do on a regular basis. But what you said is very interesting because maybe 5 or 6 years ago, I was seeing a physician about something, and I caught myself saying, but I should be able to. And as it was coming out of my mouth, even then I was thinking, who says?
Yeah.
Like, who says I should be able to play golf?
Right.
Who says? This body.
This isn't a right. This isn't a God-given right. Yeah.
And that was really profound for me because I've said that to clients before who said, well, I should be able to. And I'll say, well, it'd be nice. But, how we were designed, maybe you should be able to, and maybe not. Maybe based on some conditions you have, that's not the greatest thing. Like I've had some clients say, yoga, for instance, I should be able to do yoga. It's like, your spine says otherwise.
Yeah.
You can do some things.
Right.
There are some poses that are fine. Great. I think you'd be great to do those. These other ones, I know you like doing them, but that's what gives you pain. So maybe avoid those ones. And getting that to think that way and say, maybe not everybody should be able to do everything, and finding what your body's capable of. And as a trainer and as a Pilates instructor, it's our job to really sort of find what they are capable of and get them as close as possible to whatever their goal is, and hopefully get them there. But for us to explain to them, well, today, maybe not. Maybe you can't do everything that you'd like to do.
Exactly. And then, that's who we work with a lot, right?
Yeah.
I've had a few Ferraris in my time for sure. But then I've had an awful lot of Pintos and Honda. Yeah.
Exactly. I have a question for you. talking about cueing and talking about getting people to do what you ask them to do. I was at a conference with a gentleman, keep his name out of this because he's fairly well respected. And he says that in our position, what we do, we should never, ever, ever put our hands on a client for cueing. Now, he said we can use a pencil and touch them, but not our hands. Never touch. And as he was saying this, okay, forgive me, but I was thinking, you're full of crap. I mean, that was my first initial instinct.
Right. Like, what?
That works for you. Not going to work for me.
Yeah.
But I started thinking about it, thinking, okay, he doesn't feel comfortable doing that. And there is an intimacy involved sometimes in what we're doing, especially if you're a solo practitioner. You may be in your home by yourself with one person. And as a male, I can understand how some females may be not as comfortable if I'm taking their arm through a range of motion or something. And I did massage therapy, so I'm very aware of that boundary. But I am also very aware that sometimes I just got to put their shoulders where I need them, or I've got to have them feel where they need to feel this without getting too close to anything, intimate.
So, yeah. I like certainly depending on what your profession is, so what you're licensed to do and what state you're in and what the rules are. I think that's a very conservative approach, like, just don't touch, period. And I get that. There's liability, there's lack of clarity, there's all kinds of things. On the other hand, not having your hands, I mean, the human touch is incredibly powerful.
Unbelievably.
Incredibly powerful. And especially, and I'm sure you've thought about this, and I know Tom and I have had a lot of conversations about this. If I know what I'm trying to get out of that body, when I touch them, I will get that out of that body.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So if I'm really clear, like I am touching this shoulder to relax the upper trap, for example, right? Or I'm touching this hamstring to kind of wake it up.
Mm-hmm.
Right. If I'm really clear on that, I can get that response out of the body, because there is a profound power in touch. I mean, anybody will say that. Anybody who's ever done anything with massage or anything else, like the energy that comes from our hands onto another body is incredibly powerful and meaningful.
Yes. No question.
Yeah. So, I mean, certainly when I was, doing a lot of practice in person, right now I'm doing more virtual. I did a lot of hands-on stuff. I also, because like you, I'm a massage therapist. I also would do things like, okay, let's do a little bit of body work first. Let's release your quadratus lumborum, for example, before we go through your workout. Because I was chronically spasming for a client, and I would kind of give a little 5-minute release on it. And then when they worked, they could be much more effective and efficient and actually help to heal that spasm, help to kind of create more dynamic movement in that area. And without my hands, I would not have been able to make that difference. Right. Yeah. Or I think about one other client who had no rotational ability, like literally he, and it wasn't until I got my hands around his rib cage and was like, okay, this is what it means to rotate, that he could rotate.
Yeah. Yeah. What you said was very interesting. It's true. Virtual. I have a few clients that I can only see virtually because they moved out of the area, but they only trust me to work with them. And I work with them on a weekly or biweekly basis. And it is, unless they are, and I've got one who is very body aware, man. As soon as I say one thing, he gets it. Boom, he's doing it. I've got many others who I have to continue to say the same thing. And it's like beating my head against the wall sometimes because it's just not getting through. And for one person, there's a slight language barrier, and I get that. So I have to clarify and simplify and try and make it a little bit easier to understand. As brilliant as she is, there's a little bit of that language thing going on. But with my hands, I'd be able to so easily put them in the right position, get them to say, okay, I want you to feel it here instead, like you're saying for rotation, where, for instance, if I want someone to do a cross, like crunching motion, almost everybody almost everybody tries to lead with the elbow and bring it across the
Right.
body, and they
And
yank
also
and they
kind of
side
side
bend.
bends or something. Yeah.
But if I could put my hand on the rib cage of one side and their hip bone on the other and say, make my fingers closer, boom, they feel it differently. It's given them 2 points of contact that they're like, oh, I feel that. And I didn't have to say anything else.
Right. Yeah.
And it just, when I discovered that one day, I was like, wow, that made 5 or 6 repetitions of me trying to get them to do it right.
Yep.
I eliminated, boom, here, do this. And once they feel it, I say, now anchor that feeling. Okay, move my fingers away. And they're doing it properly. So I find that there's a huge value
Yeah.
in getting them to
Absolutely.
feel that. And like you said, when we're doing
Absolutely.
it virtually, that really becomes an issue.
The other thing too about hands-on, and this is partly because of my massage background, partly because of my acupuncture background. When I have my hands on somebody, I can feel the tissue quality also.
Mhm.
And I'm thinking of one client particularly who was rather round, so she's just kind of round everywhere, and she always wore big T-shirts, which is not uncommon. And it wasn't until I put my hands on her spinous processes and her low back that I realized what posture she was holding. Because you really couldn't
Ah,
tell any of that from the outside. She also had, like
sure.
I used her example, but she also had lipomas, so like fatty tumors along her rector spinae. So you really couldn't, like, you could not see the spine because there was just a lot of
Mhm.
stuff over it between clothing and tissue. And it was like, oh, and she was somebody, this is a classic example. Every time she would do a roll down, supported roll down on the trap table, with the roll down bar, her back would be uncomfortable. And I was like, that's a little bit unusual. That doesn't always happen. So finally, I was like, okay, what's happening with her low back? Put my fingertips on her spinous processes of those low lumbars and realized as soon as she rolled back, she wasn't staying in flexion. She was going into rather extreme extension. But you couldn't
Uh-huh.
see that. I couldn't see that through the tissue and I couldn't see that through the clothing.
Sure.
And it was like, so in that case, my hands-on was essential for assessment as well.
Mhm.
Because then I could cue it. Then I could say, okay, so don't let this happen. Like, don't let those fingers slide into you. Pull that in, tuck your tailbone under. Like, I could cue it more effectively because I knew what was happening. So
Absolutely.
it's not just finding stuff. It's also feeling stuff.
And what you say about tissue quality as well, that's very true because you and I both, you touch one person and they could look the exact same. They could be the same size. And one person's like touching jelly, their shoulders, their back, everything just is
Squish,
wow. There's
wet, and
squish.
squishy.
And
Mhm.
other people are so fixated. It's like, it's a rock. Nothing's
Dry and
moving. And you can
stiff.
see why. Now, they both may have poor movement quality because one, the muscles aren't awake. There's no tonicity to it. They're not able to get those muscles turned on. And the other person is just so fixated that they can't move them properly. But unless you put your hands on them, you really can't tell any of that. Now, again, for you and I, we've done a lot more hands-on body work, so it's a little easier for us. But you're absolutely right. The tissue quality tells so much about that person and what I need to do to get them to move better.
Yeah, so I think I mean, I'm again a big fan of touch, but the other thing too about touch, and I've said this a lot, in my job as the Pilates on Tour, programmer, a lot of people say, "Oh, I want to do a hands-on workshop for like 3 hours," and I was always a little bit hesitant, and the reason I was hesitant is because I've had a number of people who did terrible hands-on on me in various circumstances, and I feel like in some ways, if you want to do hands-on, you should study hands-on. I know
Mhm.
that's a little bit intense, but I feel like it takes a lot of touching a lot of bodies to really get that kind of sensitivity in your fingers. And the classic for me is I can't tell you how many people will have somebody up like in a short spine stretch on the reformer, right, where their feet are in the straps and they're basically up in a shoulder stand, and they're holding one foot with one hand. Okay, if that's ever happened to you, it is the most disturbing feeling in the planet because you've got completely different feedback on each side of your body,
Uh-huh.
right? Or else I'll have somebody who's kind of like just has their hand draped on somebody with no meaning, no purpose, and is talking to them. And these are just things that, like, again, as somebody who uses my hands very intentionally, drives me nuts. Because I feel like if you're touching somebody, you need to know why. You need to be aware of what you're doing, where your body energy is, and you need to touch them with intention. As long as that's happening, there's 100 ways to do that. And there's 100 great ways to do that. You don't have to do this version or one finger, like all the, like, touch with your heel, touch with your palm, touch whatever, all that stuff.
Right. Exactly.
That doesn't really matter if you know exactly why you're doing it and what your intention is.
Yes. Yes. Great example I just had this morning. I was having someone do a tricep push down. And as you know, on a cable machine, a lot of times the shoulders want to roll forward.
Right. Yep.
So I had one hand on their anterior portion of their shoulder, just my middle and ring finger, just light touch to keep it open. And my other hand was on their scapula, just to remind them we don't want to see a lot of movement through here. And they were both lightly, I was putting maybe a pound of pressure on both. I wasn't keeping them in position. It was a reminder. And she asked me, she said, what were you trying to do there? And I said, oh, great question. I said, you were trying to roll your shoulder forward. Could you feel that? She goes, oh yeah. And I said, so my fingers there are just reminding you not to let that happen, because occasionally when they did go forward, I basically just gently push them back or tap back and say shoulder back, shoulders. Right. And they immediately pay attention, and she went right back to the proper position. And it was a good way for me to remind myself, tell them what I'm feeling, what I'm trying to cue for, because not everybody's in my brain, obviously, but it was a good reminder. And yeah, it's good for her to know too, that what I was trying to have her do. So then on the second set, I lightened up my touch even more till I wasn't even holding onto the shoulder. And then I saw it float forward. I put my finger back. She goes, yep, I caught that. I felt that. So it drew their attention into that. So I could use touch as well as my verbal cue together, but giving her that intention. And it really made a difference.
Yes. Yeah, exactly. That's great. And it's also, this brings us back to a lot of what Tom talks about a lot, which is, really involving your client in the process.
Yes.
And I know, I can certainly do it too. And I'm sure you've done it too, where you're like, you just kind of forget that the client's there and you do what you're supposed to do. And I see this all the time also. This isn't just me. I know this is kind of a universal thing where you just, you're like, oh, I know what I'm trying to do. So I'm just going to like have you do this thing. And you don't tell the client why you're doing it. And they don't really know what your intention is. And they're happy to do it because that's, they're used to being told what to do by you, and that's what they do. But it's so much more effective when you kind of involve them in it and say, well, if you would like to get better at this, whatever your goal is, these are the things we're going to do to get you there. And we're going to start with this because blah, blah, blah. That's again, creating that purpose and creating that meaning.
Yeah. I have a fairly new piece of equipment that involves a lot of rotation and anti-rotation. And it's attached to a cable machine. And it's really interesting that when I put someone into it for the first time, I have to really explain everything that they're going to be feeling, because it's trying to twist them. And they say, what do you mean I have to turn 360 degrees because it's pulling me around? And you can see that I've never asked them to do anything like this. Exactly. And I demonstrate so they see me do it, and you could see them, huh? But once I get them into the right position, I say, now, can you feel how this is pulling you this way? Oh, yeah. Now, what I want you to do is resist that urge. And then when I want it to, I'm going to say, now, let that pull you a little bit. Let it pull you in that direction, and then pull back out of it. Oh, so I said, so like tug of war, you're going to let it pull you a little. You're going to pull it a little bit. And once you get into that, they're like, oh, I got this. But you really have to explain what the intention is. And once they feel it, they own it. And let's hope they remember it next time.
Well, there's always that, but few repetitions, hopefully they'll figure it out. It'll start to make sense in their body, which is interesting, because what you bring up there is just in general, there are things that I find people have an easier time figuring out. So one of them is sagittal exercises and symmetry.
Mm-hmm.
Do you feel like both your legs are, yes. Can you feel, yes. Like if I'm working in the sagittal plane, whatever that is, like any kind of bilaterally symmetrical sagittal stuff, or even unilateral sagittal stuff, I find the connections just clearer. As soon as I go to
Mm-hmm.
rotation of any kind in any environment,
Gone.
like that's really where that self-awareness, often like your experience, I don't know what I'm supposed to, like, what's happening here.
Yeah.
There's literally that level of lack of awareness because we don't think that way. Our eyes are in front of us. We walk,
Mm-hmm.
in a relatively sagittal fashion, and that's where we're oriented. We're not oriented
Mm-hmm.
in rotation, in spite of the fact that it is a critical part of a lot of our movement patterns.
And a lot of the
So,
musculature that is involved in rotation, there's not a ton of proprioception, except for our obliques. And even for some people, they may or may not feel that as much,
yeah,
but a lot of it's happening at the spine. So
which
they're
is,
feeling, they're feeling their hand. If I want them to do a single arm press with a band or something, they're thinking
right.
about where their hand is ending up, not
Yes.
about rotating from their actual spine, allowing their
Yes.
shoulders to rotate and their hand to reach further. All they're thinking of is throw that arm out there as far as possible because they can't feel it.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
Yeah. Yeah.
it's really about getting them to feel what they can feel. Here's what I want you to feel, and understanding, okay, these muscles may not have much proprioception, especially along the spine. So
Yeah.
we need to focus on the ones that you can feel, to keep you upright, keep you erect, and as you're moving. So sometimes it's directing their attention in that for rotation that I find is the challenge.
And I would say it's like what you're saying about lack of proprioception. Because when I'm working with rotation, I'm often playing with, okay, let's just add the arm, and okay, now let's add the torso, now let's add the hip. Like trying to build up the coordination of rotation is
Mm-hmm.
often something many clients are lacking. Like most
Yeah.
of my clients are lacking. And even if they're a rotational athlete, like I think of a golfer that I was playing with, she'd been golfing for years, man, and her discoordination in her rotation was kind of profound. So I have
Mm-hmm.
to assume if she had a golf club that she could coordinate it, but in any kind of non-specific to that activity,
Yeah.
it was like the shoulders would move, and then the torso, and then the hips would move, and then the torso. Like it was completely discombobulated. So that rotational piece is really a place where it's not just the spine that's not proprioceptive. It's also, there's a scapula piece to that, especially if it's a thrower or
Sure.
something like that. There's no proprioception there either. I mean,
Yeah.
really, people have no idea where their scapula are. So like, there's not, like, especially if the hand is on something,
Mm-hmm.
proprioception here is so loud. This is
Yes.
like the yelling through a megaphone, and everything else is so quiet.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And explaining that to them, because people want to, what should I be feeling? And in rotation,
Right.
sometimes it's not about what you're feeling in that sense, because it can be very challenging. I've worked with bodybuilders in the past and said, okay, I need you to flex this muscle like their lat or their rhomboid. They don't feel it. Like, what do you mean?
No.
And it's a
Right.
total disconnect, and they have to be trained on how to do that. Now they're very specific for what they're doing, but for rotation, it's really challenging saying, okay, you have, these spinal stabilizers. Now, some of them involve rotation. They don't care about that. And
No.
and like you said, for the scapula, they don't know where it is in space. There's so many muscles attached to it that they're all moving and in motion that it's really hard for them to feel where it is in space.
Yeah.
So I find that
Absolutely.
disconnect can make it a lot more challenging too.
Yeah. Yeah. But and again, so much of it, I think we talked about this before, but so much of what you're trying to do with your cueing, whether it's verbal, whether it's, kinesthetic or tactile, whether it's visual, is increase their proprioception and their awareness of what they're doing, right? To get
Mhm.
back to that kind of basic fundamental level of what we're doing. And that's really where I find the kinesthetic, or I'm going to say tactile specifically, because I think kinesthetic and
Mhm.
tactile, I think of as two slightly different things,
Sure.
is really critical there, to really
Yeah.
get that, like, oh, this is how my torso moves. This is how my pelvis. Oh, this is my pelvis moving. Oh,
I once had, I came up with this and I can't even remember where I came up with it. And it was as I was having someone do a rotational activity. I said, feel as though you're being unscrewed from a piece of wood by a screwdriver. because I wanted them to get taller as they were going through the motion. And that seemed to really help. That seemed to work. In their mind. I had another client that as soon as I said that, she just said, well, I've never been unscrewed before. Like, oh, okay, a little too much information there. And
Okay.
she was kind of body and it was fun. But yeah, getting to that imagery and saying, this is that motion of, if you can feel that, I want you to feel like you're getting taller as you're pressing that one arm forward. And when she was thinking about that, I was like, oh yeah, it made sense to her, and I've used that with different clients in the past, and it really seems to help for rotation. Again, giving them that image and giving them that intention. I think a lot of it is coming down to intention, telling them what you want, why you want it, and then again, showing them, explaining it as much as possible. But then sometimes you just got to get your hands on them and get them to move their body through space.
Yeah, absolutely. So we've talked about auditory, we've talked about kinesthetic for sure. I want to just come back to visual just for a brief moment.
Sure.
Visual, one of the things that I had to learn as a teacher, and I've said this to a lot of the teachers that I've taught, is visual, for most people, do not learn movement very well visually. Like that's just, there's a very few people that do that. And a lot of the ones that do are because they've been trained that way. So for example, dancers are learning to teach are learning to move by watching somebody else move. And so they're very visual that way. And I can't tell you how many times, I know this is less true for what you do, because like, okay, we're gonna do a squat, you show them a couple squats, you're good. But like on the reformer, that means you've got to set it up, you've got to lie down, you've got to show the exercise. And then so many times you'll like do that, boom, boom, you show the exercise, you stand up and they look at you.
Like you never did to it.
They have absolutely no idea what that means they're supposed to do.
Yep.
Right. So it was one of the things I learned as a new teacher, like, okay, I stopped demonstrating and I just talked them through it.
Yeah.
If it was something really obscure or had a lot of different steps to it, I might show them all the different steps, especially when they're more advanced. So they had a sense of like what was kind of like a preview, but it'd be kind of just a quick, like, this is what we're going to be doing. Now let's talk it through.
Yes. Yeah.
So, visual, and it's different in a mat class or in a group exercise class. Right there you're talking, usually doing verbal cueing as well, unless you're a Zumba teacher, but mostly you're doing verbal cueing as well. And they are just following along, right?
Right.
So that is a situation where visual learning is the key thing. But I think in a one-on-one setting, I really optimize my other kind of cueing and minimize my visual cueing for that environment in general.
A lot of times I feel the visual gets the first 30%, meaning here's what the position is. If I want them to do a squat, for instance, I will say, okay, we're going to do a side lunge. So I'm going to have your feet be wide. They're going to be wide apart, toes turned out. So when I'm demonstrating it, I'm showing them. Yeah. So they can mirror me. So I'll say, okay, now, and then I'll demonstrate one or two. And as I'm doing it, I'm explaining what I'm looking for. I want your hips to sit back. I'm going to keep my weight through my big toe, small cues. Planting the seeds. That's all I'm doing.
Yeah.
I'm getting them in the correct position and planting a seed or two. And then I'm going to get into more cueing. But the beginning portion of the visual is just, I want you to get in approximately the right place. But you're right. If you're doing something on the reformer, I may string together 4 or 5 different, exercises. And I can't show all of those at one time and expect them to remember a doggone thing. They might remember one if I'm lucky.
Yeah, exactly. And I think the complexity of equipment just makes all that kind of weirder. So it's just one of those things I like to remind, because new students, especially new students who are dancers, like will often demonstrate everything. And I'm like, just stop. Just stop and just talk them through it. You'll be more efficient.
Yep, absolutely.
In a lot of circumstances. Yeah.
Yep.
All right, my dear. I
think we covered a lot here.
We did.
And I'm glad we took this opportunity. Sometimes we're able to, and sometimes we don't when we interview somebody, or this time 2 people who are talking about a similar thing. And we're hoping to do that more and more this year, trying to get people who might even have different views or opinions on the same topic. And that way we can do a little wrap up of what we just heard. So here's sort of our version of taking that information, and hopefully you learn something, and maybe you'll see how our brain processes, like we talked about earlier, how we processed what we heard from Eric and from Tom. So hopefully you learned a lot. Do us a favor, as always, hit that like and subscribe. We really appreciate it so much. If you have any questions or comments, or if you have someone that you'd love to see be interviewed by us and come on the show, please hit us up on our email, movingconvos@gmail.com. Give us their information. You know, if they're appropriate to what we teach, we'd love to talk with other people, especially people who we don't know, because we're very curious people. So we'd love to find out more information about it, just about everything. So yeah. And so until next week, for Nora St. John, I'm Brian Ritchie. We'll see you next time.
Bye, guys.